Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Alex Hoffman. I'm with the Equipment Dealers Association. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started today. First, we really encourage you guys to ask questions throughout today's presentation. At the top of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Click that. You're able to type a question that only our panelists can see. Depending on how specific the question is, they may choose to respond directly to you via text or answer for the group. But please ask questions, and we'll take a break for questions during the presentation and then again at the end. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded. After the presentation is concluded today, we'll send a recording to everyone who's registered. The recording will also be available on our news website. And we'll go ahead and get started. I'll turn it over to Natalie.
All right, well, thanks, Alex. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Natalie Higgins, and I'm Vice President of Government Relations for the Equipment Dealers Association. I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues, Will Rogers and William Bernard. EDA is the largest dealer association in North America. We represent approximately 4,500 dealers in both the United States and Canada. One of the most important things that we do here at EDA is advocate for a healthy business environment for equipment dealers at the national level. And one way that we do that is by identifying legislative trends that could have a profound effect on our members. Right to Repair is one of these issues, and we've been coordinating an industry working group with our colleagues at other industry associations to work on this issue. Two representatives of those associations are with us this morning. First of all, Will Rogers is joining us from our friends over at Iowa, Nebraska Equipment Dealers Association. Will is head of government affairs with Iowa, Nebraska, and he's been really instrumental in educating Iowa and Nebraska legislators about right to repair legislation, as well as the farm bureaus in those states. So we're so happy he could join us. He is joining us, of course, from beautiful Des Moines this morning, so we're happy to have him. And then we also are joined by Bernie, who is the Manager of Technical and Safety Services for the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. Bernie has been a big player in our industry working group. He brings a lot of technical experience to our group, and his experience is not only on the equipment manufacturer side, but also on the dealer side. So he's been able to help us understand the technical aspects of right to repair legislation and give us a more thorough understanding of those issues. And Bernie is joining us from Milwaukee, Wisconsin this morning, so we are so glad Will and Bernie were able to join us.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Natalie. I appreciate being here.
All right, so we'll just give you an overview really quick of the information we'll cover today in the webinar. We'll spend the bulk of our time explaining the main arguments that you're likely to encounter in favor of right to repair legislation and or right to repair policy initiatives that you see within your state. We will also talk about other industry concerns that we have with respect to this type of legislation and policy statements. And then finally, we'll wrap up with sort of an overview of the ways that you can be prepared for this type of legislation or policies and the proactive ways and things that you can do to be a part of these important discussions in your local community. So obviously, we've got a lot to do. We'll go ahead and get started. All right, I'll turn it over to Will.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. So I want to start off with discussing what is the right to repair movement. In essence, right to repair is a movement that seems to associate the ability to repair a piece of equipment with property ownership. And this movement has been active in other industries such as the cell phone industry, or cars, or medical devices, where people seem to be frustrated not only about just the cost of repairs and replacement for their property, but in essence, this movement seems to be stemming from that frustration that people are encountering with the digital age. And they seem to be frustrated that technology evolves so quickly that they're unable to make the repairs themselves, either because they're not, technologically savvy, or because they're unable to get enough information about the technology and how it functions to make the repairs themselves. Last year, however, we began to see a real push to bring this movement into the farm equipment sector in the state of Nebraska. This legislative push was funded and promoted largely by aftermarket parts manufacturers who went to be in on the market of protected information. And there are two nationwide leaders in this movement, one of them being the iFixit and the other being Repair.org. So let's take a look at the agendas of these two organizations to give you a better understanding of what Right to Repair proponents are really after. And Natalie, whenever.
With respect to, thanks, Will. So with respect to iFixit, up here on the screen, you'll see what's known as the Repair Manifesto. And this is something that iFixit puts on their website, and they encourage all of the people that are involved with their association to utilize this messaging tool to get their sort of core beliefs, their core mission out to the public. And as you'll see, the group has some very specific goals and objectives. And again, as Will explained, this organization seems to associate the ability to repair goods as a necessity in order to demonstrate ownership. They say right at the top here, if you can't fix it, you don't own it. So that's sort of their core belief. And they also believe that there shouldn't be any limitations as to how people use or modify the goods that they purchase. So really, as we see it, the benchmark of this association is that they want to have lay individuals create their own repair manuals for basically every good that's manufactured. It's obviously seems like a very monumental task, but that's what their sort of call to action for people that are involved with their association is. They want to have a manual for every good that's created by people that have it, so that they don't there aren't any circumstances where you can't fix your own property yourself. So at iFixit, they seem to believe that anyone, if given service information, can fix anything, and that society as a whole would benefit if consumers took the time to fix or modify their property themselves. As you see, they seem to have a resentment against sort of the specialization of goods and the advancement of technology that leaves people, even smart and mechanically inclined people, unable to make some of the types of repairs themselves. And the next group that we'll look at is Repair.org. And unlike the sort of philosophical approach that we saw in the Repair Manifesto that's used by iFixit, Repair.org, they seem to be focused more on what they believe are market inequalities. So namely the retention of repair information inside of the authorized dealer network or by manufacturers. You'll see right here, these are quotes taken from www.repair.org. That equipment manufacturers have a stranglehold on repairs. And, the implication is given from their website that equipment owners are currently unable to perform any repairs on their own equipment. So the Repair.org proponents argue that the current system puts individuals in rural locales at a disadvantage, and argues that both owners and local repair shops should have access to any and all service information, which is necessary to repair equipment at, quote, a fair price. And this is sort of the lingo, the common lingo that we're seeing, that they want all of this information and they want it at a, quote, fair price. So again, you see the basic arguments being presented here are that equipment owners would be better off if everyone, regardless of qualifications, training, or experience, had access to all repair information. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Will.
Thank you, Natalie. So Right to Repair proponents might be relatively small groups, but they've been very effective at getting people to talk about their message. As a result, there's a lot of misinformation that's being spread about to farmers and their rights when it comes to fixing their own equipment. In just the last couple of months, there's been several articles published online that have indicated that farmers don't have the right to fix their own equipment, or that they can't choose what company they want to have service their equipment, or that it's against the law to, quote, pop the hood, unquote, on their tractor. So not only are these statements misleading, and they just don't hold up when faced with the facts. And then you can see the cartoon that there's a little gem of information, as I call it, that indicates that farmers are going to somehow be, locked up and sent to jail for working on their own equipment. And I challenge people back with this, but say, does anybody really believe that the police are going to come to your farm, arrest you, handcuff you, and you're going to end up going to jail for working on your own tractor? And the answer I get a lot back is no, but yet that's how simple the idea is to people.
So because of the effectiveness of the conversations, like we've seen on the last slide, again, these are small groups typically, but they're getting a lot of attention. We've seen what has been known as, again, quote, fair repair legislation introduced in several states across the country. Some of these pieces of legislation are specifically targeting farm equipment, like will saw specifically in the state of Nebraska. These pieces of legislation generally seek to make all repair information, again, there would be no restricted repair information, available to anyone who wants it at a, quote, fair price. And we've seen it in several states, and we anticipate that other states will continue to see this type of legislation be introduced as, the iFixit group and the Repair.org group continue to get their message out, with these specific talking points. And so thus far, none of the pieces of legislation that we have seen do anything to address safety or liability issues that would arise with this widespread release of service information. We'll discuss our concerns with this legislation in detail later in the presentation, but in essence, we believe that the bills we've seen so far lack specific elements that are needed to protect players in the equipment industry, and especially to protect equipment owners.
So aside from the actual legislation that's being introduced, we've seen a growing trend among farm bureaus, state farm bureaus, and farmers unions that are considering adopting policy statements in favor of right to repair. Our concern is that these policies will be adopted without a thorough understanding of the current rights that equipment owners do have at this time. And we think that if this information is presented, it'll be apparent that most of the service information that equipment owners currently need already is available to them, and that this type of legislation really won't do anything. And it'll help, to really help any average farmer with their business operations.
So we haven't had any questions trickle in. Again, Alex gave you guys instructions. If you do have any questions as we go along, feel free to type those in. Like she said, the group won't see those, just Bernie, Will, and myself will see them. And it'll give us the opportunity to discuss any questions that you might have about this in your state, or, as Will's been talking about it, at the Farm Bureau or Farmers Union level. So get those questions into us. And
so let's take some time. Thanks, Natalie. So let's take some time now to review the main arguments raised by right to repair proponents within the equipment context. First, right to repair proponents argue that consumers and independent repair shops could make repairs if only they were given access to service manuals. Next, they argue that OEMs and authorized dealers prevent equipment owners from modifying their equipment as they see fit. Proponents of right to repair also argue that the release of all service information would create more local jobs, that the equipment should be treated the same as automobiles for purposes of service information. So now let's take a close look at each of these arguments. The first argument raised by right to repair opponents sounds very convincing on its face, but it's simply based upon false information. Service manuals are available for sale from manufacturers currently. There's usually a fee associated with the manual. However, authorized dealers are also paying for the information. Because this information is already widely available, you have to wonder if the real complaint is that this information is not free. If this is the case, then we have a clear difference of opinion. Dealers have to pay for this information, and so should everyone else. It doesn't seem unreasonable for a manufacturer to charge a fee for the release of very important technical information, which they invest a great deal of money to develop. In addition to misunderstanding the amount of information that is currently available, we also think this talking point ignores an important but glaring fact. Access to service manuals doesn't mean that an individual will have the skill, education, or ability to use that information as it is intended. But let's put a pin in that point for the time being and talk about the vast information that is available to equipment owners today. Take a look at this chart. Now, this is just a summary of it, but we wanted to highlight what is available right now to dispel that misconception on what is available, and highlighted in yellow are the parts that are not openly available to basically your end user customer or third parties. And you can see that's basically training that is provided by the manufacturer to the dealers, which you pay for, you, the dealers, pay for. The other is the electronic service tools that your technicians go, that they go to that training to learn how to use, proprietary tools, basically for engines and transmissions, especially with the engines, with Tier 4 engines right now, and the EPA regulations. You don't want to be tinkering with that engine. The sensitivity and the technology on is far advanced. And the one thing that I think that we need to hit home a lot is also how you partner with your customers and what is available not only from the dealership, but the manufacturing. If you look at any website, there's training, there's safety, there's best practices, and there's guidelines all online to support that customer. And you, your dealers, how many times do you have harvest clinics or planning clinics or demonstrations? All of that is to build a partnership with your customer to make sure that this information that they want is available. So go on. So the first argument raised by Right to Repair Proponents sounds very convincing on its face, but is simply based upon false information. Oh, excuse me, I want another slide. So just to reiterate, we think that the most of the information that the average equipment owner would want for purposes of maintenance and basic repair is already available. The real rub seems to be the highly sophisticated information that is restricted. In thinking about the types of information that are restricted, we need to be able to understand to our customers, the legislators, and those in our communities why that information is kept within the authorized dealer network. The general answer is that the information is proprietary, highly sophisticated information, which in general, the average person will not be able to utilize safely. Most people understand this concept, and we are talking about the small minority of equipment owners who would attempt to undertake the task of utilizing this type of information. Just because a farmer is smart and savvy doesn't mean that they want to prepare their own taxes, their own estate plans, or the like. Similarly, we think that when it comes to sophisticated repairs of expensive production of machinery, we believe that this is exactly the type of situation where equipment owners are willing to defer to the experts, you. The idea that farmers in remote locales need this information more today than ever is simply a red herring. Because of advancing technologies, dealers can remotely diagnose equipment and have a road-equipped technician to the customer in a more time-effective manner than ever before. This technology is enhancing the dealer's ability to provide service, not hindering the customer's use. Will?
Will, are you still there? Well, I'll go ahead and take over for Will. So again, we fully concede that there are certain areas of service information that are restricted, but these areas are restricted for very important reasons, not to make dealers money, but because of the safety, environmental, warranty, and liability issues that giving unrestricted access could raise. The first thing we want to mention is that the Environmental Protection Agency and how the Tier 4 engine has really changed everything when it comes to how manufacturers can be held liable by the EPA for non-compliance with emission standards. We are very concerned that the EPA could expand this and start looking to equipment dealers to either be enforcement mechanisms. So if a piece of equipment comes into a dealership and is not put back at factory setting after it's been modified, we're very concerned that the EPA would be enforcing fines or penalties against dealers who don't proactively rectify a modification that was made by someone else that in fact is violating one of those EPA standards. You know, the emission systems on farm equipment are controlled and calibrated through the onboard and operating systems. And so resetting that piece of equipment in and of itself can be something that's very costly. And so we're looking at the reasons, you know, the possibility of liability against dealers when it comes to those types of illegal modifications. And our next concern is that the equipment warranty and the products under warranty might be affected when a user or a third party makes that type of unauthorized change that we've been talking about. Now, most people would assume that when you change a piece of machinery, when you modify it from its original design function, that you would void the warranty. But these right to repair proponents are in essence arguing that the manufacturers and the dealers should have to stand behind that piece of equipment, behind that product, even if it's been modified or tweaked from its original operating system. So obviously we think that that's very problematic for dealers, and we have serious concerns about it. So the next concern that I'll mention is regarding safety and how it creates a large amount of liability exposure when it comes to farm equipment. We'll be the first to admit that farm equipment isn't going to get less sophisticated in the future. We are very, very close to having production model tractors that will operate autonomously. And at some point when that equipment malfunctions, and it will, we need to know who the last person to get into the software, to modify that software, to repair it, to make changes, who did it and when, in order to determine who's liable for any property damage, for any injuries, and even incidental death. So when this happens, there's going to be lawyers that are going to be looking, you know, who can pay for the damages that have occurred. And, you know, it's common sense to think, are they going to go after, you know, an equipment owner with little to no liability insurance or assets that could be seized, or similarly, an independent repair shop with very little liability insurance or assets that would be available to compensate an injured party. And when you think more likely, they're going to try to find a way to loop in either that authorized dealer that at some point has serviced that piece of equipment, or the OEM, because they have, both of those parties are going to have deeper pockets, and they're going to be looking for a way to hold them liable for that damage. You know, an authorized dealer or OEM can be named in any lawsuit under the existing law. There's nothing under these right to repair laws that would give them any kind of liability shield. And, you know, even if they had absolutely nothing to do with, you know, even if they have nothing to do with an improper modification, an improper repair that have given rise to whatever the damages are, it can still cost them thousands and thousands of dollars just to get out of a lawsuit, because they've got to prove that they are not the ones that made that repair, that they are not the ones that made that improper modification. And doing that in theory is easy, but it's not always easy to do in real time. So it's a very difficult situation to be in. The next issue I wanted to talk about was trade-in value. And this is sort of common sense, but unauthorized repairs are going to certainly complicate the ability of consumers to purchase used equipment. As a general proposition, it seems unlikely that consumers will want to pay the same price for a piece of equipment that was serviced by an untrained, unqualified technician as they would want to for a piece of equipment that's been maintained and serviced by those with the expertise to do so safely, and with specifically, and most importantly, with an understanding of the legal safety and legal environmental requirements that that consumer is going to be looking at to make sure that they are complying with all existing law when they purchase that piece of equipment. So You know, we also have concerns. So what kind of implications is this going to have for dealers? If a person or business is selling a piece of equipment which has been modified or repaired, what kind of duty is going to be imposed upon the dealer that's selling that piece of used equipment after it's been modified or repaired by an unauthorized service provider? So again, these are nuanced issues. There's not a clear-cut answer, but there certainly is significant liability and safety issues that we are concerned about and that haven't been addressed in these pieces of legislation that have been introduced to date. So again, we just want to take some time now. So this is, as I mentioned, Will has been dealing with this type of legislation in the state of Nebraska. And we wanted to take the time to show you some actual arguments that Will encountered when opposing right to repair legislation in that state. So here are some excerpts from the testimony given by proponents of right to repair during a hearing in front of the legislature. As you can see, the testimony is especially critical of equipment dealers and the information that is restricted within the dealer network. So again, I'm paraphrasing the testimony, but this witness is essentially arguing that anyone who has the coding and the software can do the same job as an equipment dealer. And again, we believe that this testimony is misguided because for the average farmer, all of the service information they need for basic maintenance and repairs is already available to them either directly from the manufacturer or from an authorized dealer. And what right to repair proponents really want is access to the highly sophisticated software and technology that requires training and experience to make a repair safely. So again, in our mind, having the information doesn't mean you have the skill to use it safely. So here again, here's some additional testimony. And this is a particularly interesting section. This is a Nebraska senator. He's honing in on one of what we think are the really big issues with right to repair. And that's if you give everyone coding that controls emissions and safety, you run the very real risk that this coding will be modified in a way that violates state or federal law, or which will create a safety threat to the equipment operators or third parties. And you'll see in this testimony that they're raising the argument that only the person making the modification can be liable for that type of modification. So they're arguing, well, if they make that modification on their own, they're liable. It's not that easy. It's not that cut and dry under product liability law. Again, it's very difficult to prove who made a modification and when. And we're concerned, again, that enforcement agencies, we mentioned the EPA, but there could be others, will begin to target dealers who did not revert a piece of equipment to factory settings when it comes in and it's obviously in a modified condition, which is not in compliance with those regulations. So those are the things that we're thinking about now and that are very concerning to us. And so this issue is at the very heart of why this type of information, the service information, is restricted currently, and why we think that legislation, at least as we've seen it thus far, is inadequate and unnecessary. And I'll just wrap up with this other piece of testimony that Will encountered while he was in Nebraska. And again, this is some telling testimony about the real objective, we think, of right to repair legislation. These proponents want to modify equipment through a third party in a way that might not conform with applicable safety or emission standards. Authorized dealers are not going to do this because of the safety and liability implications that we've already discussed. We frankly don't think this type of information is something that the average farmer wants or needs to operate their business. We think this is mainly a push about aftermarket parts getting in on that protected service information that they don't have access to currently. And we want our dealers to know what these driving forces are, because you need to be able to combat them in your communities and keep the lines of communication open with your customers. You know, dealers and farmers are partners in business and in their communities. We've got to focus on that relationship and not get distracted by any of these aftermarket manufacturers coming in and looking to get that service information so that they can copy or modify it. So again, just to stress, this is an opportunity for you to be educated about what the subject and have that conversation with your customers. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Bernie.
So let's look at another argument. We've seen is that the equipment should be treated the same as automobiles. Right to repair has already been seen in the auto industry. But automobiles are consumer goods that have limited functionality. Equipment that you service every day, on the other hand, are essentially factories on wheels. If we want to treat equipment like we treat automobiles, then minimum liability insurance is one way we could address the very real risk that would be created by allowing unrestricted repairs and modifications. Under DOT regulations, a motor carrier, regardless of size, must carry $1 million in liability insurance. Perhaps a similar minimum financial responsibility would be appropriate for independent repair shops.
Okay, Bernie, I'm going to jump in here real quick. Proponents of right to repair continually claim that this type of legislation will lead to more, quote, local jobs, and that they insinuate that authorized dealerships are outsiders who are not part of their rural communities. And we disagree. Plain and simple, authorized dealers provide some of the best jobs that rural communities have. They offer competitive pay and benefits, and in turn keep that money in the community so that churches, schools, main streets can stay open. Authorized dealers are a big part of rural economic health. Bernie?
You're exactly right. And so now we just want to take a brief recap of our chief concerns with this type of legislation. Separate from the talking points that we've seen here from the right to repair proponents, there are other issues with this type of legislation that we find concerning. One of these issues is the lack of any training or qualification requirements that you invest heavily in as a dealership. We touched on this earlier, but the release of the information is not going to keep equipment users safe. Go on to the next slide. Additional steps must be taken to ensure that people using this information are doing so safely. A good example of the steps that should be taken before using this information is the model that we see in authorized dealerships of investments in safety and technology training. Not to mention the hundreds of thousands of dollars that dealers invest in equipping their service facilities to safely and effectively provide their customers with service. If right to repair proponents want to codify their right to access and use this information, we'd also codify the minimum qualifications needed to use it. Natalie?
Well, Bernie, since we'll wait on Natalie, I'm going to say, with respect to liability, the bills we have seen wholly neglected practical situations and the release of the technical service information will create. If manufacturers and dealers are going to be required to provide this information to anyone, regardless of skill or qualification, then they should be given some legal assurances that they won't be liable when things go awry. To accomplish this, we'd like to look for any right to repair legislation to have specific liability shifting clauses that make clear that when a dealer or a manufacturer are immune from liability. Furthermore, we could bolster the effectiveness of such a provision with a minimal financial responsibility clause, meaning that there would be liability insurance requirement for anyone accessing or using this information. And again, we've seen this in the trucking context. We have people that are businesses that set up and cover over-the-road trucking businesses, and they can't operate a truck without at least $1 million in liability insurance. So if we'll move on, just finally, we do have legitimate concerns about the validity of the philosophical arguments behind right to repair legislation. Are we letting someone gamble with somebody else's personal safety? Furthermore, dealers are not scared of competition, but let's make some, insurance that, competition is going to be on a fair playing field that protects equipment owners and doesn't incentivize reckless behavior. Furthermore, anyone who wants to work on their equipment that is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars should have to demonstrate that they have the financial ability to do that and have the adequate service facilities to make sure that they also are adequately trained, just like our dealers and their employees. So,
Well,
is there any questions?
Yeah, let's go ahead and see. I think we have just 1 second. We'll go ahead and look at our questions here. The first question that we have is this a PowerPoint available to our dealers? We will have the PowerPoint available to go out to our dealers. If you'd like to receive a copy of that, go ahead and just give us an email. My email is nhiggins@equipmentdealer.org, and we're happy to send that out to you. And then with respect to the next question we have is, what about repairs to diesel engines that may affect emissions? Well, you know, this is one of the things that we're looking at is, you know, where is the liability going to end with respect to modifications, you know, and that is something that we're very concerned about. Is the EPA specifically going to be looking to equipment dealers to enforce, you know, in essence, to restore factory settings on a piece of equipment that's been modified? And if not, are they going to be imposing liability in the form of fines or criminal charges against dealers? So those are very specific and serious concerns that we are looking at and we are concerned about under this type of state legislation.
Natalie, you're correct, and I think all of our dealers understand with these new Tier 4 engines, you really need to have the right tools, you have to have the right training, and you have to have the understanding on how to repair those machines, because if you mess up and don't do it correctly, you could be looking at a big price tag. Good point.
That's right. And Bernie, I'll let you field this last question. The last question is, isn't it true that some manufacturers let the customers attend service training?
Well, I think there's a very limited there. I mean, we all have, mainly most manufacturers have field representatives that come out and provide training, not only to the dealerships, their mechanics, but also to customers. And you do that in clinics and demonstrations and those kind of different environments. There are occasional, you know, very large customers that have fleets that come in and basically are given that same information, but more in a more focused atmosphere because they have a large amount of machinery and a large amount of people working on that equipment. So again, that is still part of the partnership that I think our dealers, our manufacturers build every day with our customers, trying to give them the ideas, the understanding, talking to the service people, talking to the service manager so they can understand their equipment better. Good point.
And then we've got another question. It says, do extended warranty options like PowerGuard give the OEM more control than a standard warranty? And again, so that's something that we are concerned about, because these pieces of legislation are basically aimed, you know, I think Will touched on it. They're aimed at getting around that contractual obligation to provide a warranty and going to guarantee it through a piece of legislation. And so a manufacturer in theory could be required to provide a warranty to a piece of equipment, regardless of whether or not it's an extended warranty or a regular warranty. You know, and even though that piece of equipment has been modified and not serviced within their dealer network. And furthermore, the expense that could also impose on the dealer is very concerning.
Yeah, the extended warranty, Natalie, that's a good question, because you know, they basically take the same responsibility as the in-service warranty has on that machine, and it's just carried throughout. So if there's any modifications or any coding or software changes, that warranty would be affected, even if though it's an extended.
And then we have another question, and I'll let Will take this one. And it's, how is EDA interacting with the Farm Bureau so they understand both sides of the issue?
Yeah, a lot of those conversations have been taking place through the local, state associations contacting their local farm bureau. Everything from contacting at dealerships, going down to the local county farm bureau policy meetings and trying to influence the process there. We've also been setting up meetings with our state farm bureau leadership and going in and having conversations there as well. This is also a lot of state farm bureaus are going to be having policy meetings throughout the year, and on the American Farm Bureau Federation, they're going to be discussing policy late this year, early next year, as a group as well, to develop if there's going to be a policy that they have towards right to repair legislation. Couple things we've done in Nebraska, we actually participated, Natalie and I participated in a webinar as well for Farm Bureau members, and we're able to present our side of the story when it comes to right to repair.
And I think that question nicely segues into our last couple of slides here. So I'll go ahead and cover these. But basically, EDA has been developing, with the help of Will and Bernie and some other important players, resources that dealers can use to have those conversations with the Farm Bureau in their area, with the Farmers Union in their area. This is a message that needs to be carried at a local level. So if you live in a state that has seen this type of legislation introduced, we'd really like you to reach out to us. We have tools that you can use. We can provide you with the resources that you need to get involved in the conversation in a very productive way. And we would encourage you to take steps such as sending your legislators a letter, sending an op-ed to your local news source, or educating your workforce and, where appropriate, your customers about what your concerns are with respect to this type of legislation. So all of these efforts together at the local level can really make a difference and make sure that our side of the story is being heard at the State House and in the Farm Bureau setting as well. And then if you don't live in a state where this type of legislation has been filed, we still encourage you to be EDA's eyes and ears on the ground. We're looking to start taking proactive steps, such as educating your workforce on the issue, or having conversations where appropriate with your customers. Looking for those avenues to have those discussions about this issue so that they're not hearing only one side of the story, and that when someone has a question about it, they know that you're the person that they can go to get that information. So again, EDA is your resource. We have developed a significant amount of material that is available to our dealers so that you can be the voice in your community on this issue. And I don't think we have any more questions today, but I would encourage you, if you have any questions, to contact me at nhiggins, it's NHIGGINS, @equipmentdealer.org. Like Alex said, this slide presentation will be available after the fact and will be available on our news website. So if anyone missed it and needs to tune in, they're welcome to do that through our website. And then I would just like to thank Bernie and Will for joining us. You guys are awesome, and we always love working with you guys.
Thank you as well.
Thanks a lot. I think the key to it is for everybody to communicate and make sure everybody's aware of what the situation really is. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.